All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Welcome to the Linux Club. This is our opening social, our very first meeting. First, I'd like to point out this is in the back. Doran is our cameraman. He's from Bluehost. So is Andres. He's our speaker tonight. And we have Victor and Corbin via, and they brought the pizza. And Victor's from Utah Open Source. And next one. For our next meeting, next Wednesday, we're going to meet in here, and we're going to have a workshop. So the idea of the workshop is we're going to post on Facebook and say, what kind of skills do you have? So if you know how to use Arch Linux, or if you know how to use Kali, or how to install Linux, any skill, and we'll all just meet in here and just talk about whatever you want to talk about, and do whatever you want to do with Linux. What's what? Yes, you can learn about PGP, if someone knows about it.
Is there really a key signing party anywhere on the schedule?
A key standing party?
Key signing party. Key signing party.
Oh.
Exchange between.
Yeah.
I guess we could do something like that.
I could have Aaron Tilpons from Exhibition do that. He usually leads it for us at OpenWest, coordinating all the keys and
Sure.
exchange.
Okay, sure.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, we can get you with that.
And we're going to have a sign-up sheet online for everyone to say what kind of skills they could bring into the workshop, so that we can know who's committed to coming to the workshop. And so, like, I'll put on the sign-up sheet that I know how to use Kerberos, and when it comes to the workshop, I can teach them how to use Kerberos, as an example. And then our next lecture will be on October 20th. We don't know where our speaker is going to be yet, but that's when the date will be. And Rachel? Yep. Okay. And we have our website up, linuxclub.byu.edu. It's a simple WordPress page. That's all BYU would give us.
But it does run on Linux.
It does run on Linux. It was quick and dirty, but it works. So you can visit our website. And we also have a Facebook site, a Facebook page, Twitter, Tumblr, just whatever works for you. And for our club leadership, just so that everyone's aware, our advisor is Dr. Christoph. And I'm the president, Renato Schuer, he's our vice president, Zach's secretary, and Clayton's webmaster, and Rachel does our marketing. So just to introduce you to who you need to talk to if you have questions or comments, or if you have any suggestions for what we should do to change. And so this is our quick introduction to Andres. I just pulled this from your LinkedIn profile, if that's okay. So he's done work with KDE and OpenSUSE. He knows what he's doing with Linux. And we hope you guys can learn a lot from him tonight. So real quick, we want everyone to do a quick introduction. We'll start over here and go this row, this row, this row, and then backwards through the middle, like that. And just say your name and your major, something you like about Linux. So I'll start. My name's Tyler, and what I like about Linux is I really love Vim, and I love that it works on everything. And whenever I type a document in Microsoft Word, if I have to, then I end up with colon W's and just all over the place. And that's about me.
Can you guys hear me okay? Does this sound too far? Work good? Okay, cool. Well, let me just bring some of my reminders here, just because I have a lot of stuff to cover. But first of all, I wanted to thank you for coming over today. I had not ever seen that much interest in Linux. I remember when I started using it, I felt cool because no one else had it, and it was literally no one else. And so it's great to see that you guys are all very interested in it, want to learn about it. We're going to talk about today some of the things that make Linux important, makes Linux relevant. Now, first things first, I am not a computer science major, an IT major, or any of that. I actually went to BYU for history. I did history of the ancient Near East. So that is something different. And so, if you can be so forgiving to me, sometimes I may not have the right words to explain all the technical complexities of Linux. So just a word of caution. If you can help me translate things like that, that would be great. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, just very briefly. I am a Linux enthusiast, a technology enthusiast, I'm very excited to see innovation happen. And especially when it comes out of some of the models that open source offers, it's amazing to me. So that's one thing that I do, and like I mentioned before, I studied history at BYU, graduated from it too. And along these years, I have been using Linux the whole time. So when I was at BYU, I had a laptop that only had Linux on it, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to have it. And I'm going to show you some other Linux distributions that I have used, but it'll be fun. I wanted to tell you, first of all, too, about some of the ideas behind Linux and how Linux came to be. I'm sure a few of us have heard about how, Linus Torvalds started hacking away, created, a version of Linux and turned it into something that, he created drivers for, ended up working with a kernel. And then along came, Stallman, right? And he created the other side of it where, there was more software that was open code for, and you could use it, you kind of use the kernel, got the software, and boom, now there is Linux for you. That's a very reduced story, although Richard Stallman, he still thinks that he's got his own Linux going on, but we all know it's a bit different. Now, Linux defined is a bit hard because a lot of people say, well, Linux is the kernel, right? Because that's what Linus created. And others say, no, it's the components that, and the compiler that Richard Stallman and his team created. That's what makes Linux. Or others say, and it's probably a more modern idea, that Linux is the compilation of the Linux kernel plus all of the components turned into a distribution. That ends up being a Linux idea now. So when we refer to Linux, we probably mean a distribution. And a distribution, as you may know, comes in different flavors, right? You wrote down a few of them over there. People can have different ideas about how they approach code, and they want to offer different things depending on people's needs or desires. Since it's so open, you can just say, well, I don't like Ubuntu, I'll just make my own. And you could do that too. Actually, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but SUSE offers SUSE Studio. If you go to susestudio.com, you can create your own distribution live on the website. So you just click, 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 and like along comes an ISO at the end. It's really fun. So you can create your own at any point, at any time. It's really fun. And as you well know too, in most cases, Linux is open source. You can find the code for any of the components of Linux, even the kernel, online. And you can actually edit it, fork it, do whatever you want to do with it, and you can turn it into your own little project. This is really good, and I'll explain why it's really good for you and for probably possible future employment. And one really cool thing too is that Linux gets better every day. Generally, Linux is at the forefront of innovation. It's got its pros and cons, but it's always ahead, which is one really good thing. I don't think that there are businesses out there that can put that much money into something and still be ahead of Linux, in my opinion. Now, I wanted to explain to you, let me just skip this next one. Can you go to the next slide, please? How does it work for the next one? How does it work for businesses? Businesses are very enticed these days to actually use Linux, and Linux in some shape or form, because of the open development model that it has. For example, a company has to dish out money to pay developers to complete the work on something. and then they, release a version of whatever software they have. If they were to use Linux, they not only pay their development team, but they benefit from the free development that happens outside of their company and all the contributed code to that same product. And so they just say, well, I'll pick up on, let's just suppose GIMP. Have you guys ever used GIMP? Okay, so you know what GIMP is. So let's suppose GIMP. And they say, well, we want to build a commercial version of GIMP that is, is going to kill Photoshop. That could happen. And they have a community that codes for GIMP, and then they have a community, inside their company that actually builds the code for their own needs. So they benefit from the innovation that happens with the people over there outside of the company, which can be hundreds of developers that they cannot pay for, and then take that code, put it in, and build a successful business on it. So that's one really good thing about that a business can benefit from Linux. Also, another benefit, an added benefit, is that there's a lot of innovation. In Linux communities, sometimes there's a lot of fighting going on, and a lot of philosophies happening back and forth. And people say, well, I don't like the way you're building this module, so I'll just change it, and I'll create my own version of that. And these kinds of sparks or fights create innovation. People say, well, I'm happy with the way we're doing this, so we're going to try something new. And they try something new, and something very revolutionary happens with this particular module they're working on. And so a business says, look, this guy had this idea, I don't have to buy it from him, I don't have to get it. He's just integrated it to the main branch for this module, and I'm going to use it for my business. And another thing is that while most of the code that you bring into the Linux world is open source and is GPL, freely available, you can still create a paid version of that software. You still have that liberty to do that, to charge for something. So in most cases, so people who do more direct connections to Linux, they don't particularly sell Linux, but they do sell support. They do sell other versions of it that are more scaled to larger, suppose in a data center, larger data centers. So for a business to go Linux or to go open source is very good. It's a very good thing, and they do that. They do that right now. We're going to talk about later about some of the businesses that already need or use Linux on their systems. And can we go to the next slide? I just wanted to ask you very quickly, just by the eye meter, right? If you're able to mention this one right here, the one with the penguin. If you are able to name us how many distributions you're able to name. So can you tell me, and we can just do a quick count of that. Distribution. People, groups of people who have distributed Linux under a certain name. Fedora, Red Hat, CentOS. Okay, what else? What? Mint. Kali. What is it? Oh, I've never heard of that. Okay. We're at 11.
Raspbian.
Raspbian is a good one.
Technically Linux from scratch.
Linux from scratch is a good one too.
Bedrock.
What's that?
Bedrock's an interesting one. People are probably never heard of.
Oh, Bedrock? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, we have 14.
We already said Debian.
Debian, yeah, Debian is another. That's 15. I think someone named that already.
TinyCore.
TinyCore is cool. Puppy. What's that? Oh, PC Linux? Yeah, PC Linux. Well, yeah, no, you're right. Okay, which ones? What are
Another one is Damn Small Linux.
Damn small Linux. Watch out.
I can leave maintenance one is not blue flops, but it's on 2 floppy disks.
Okay, which one do you have?
Cinnamon on a stick.
Cinnamon. That's good. This Puppy Linux, someone named it already. Okay, so we have about 20.
It's cool.
What's that?
It's your school.
I never heard of that one.
Did you hear me say Fedora?
It was Christian.
No. There's Christian Linux too, yeah. So these are the ones, that's the ones you named. These are the ones that I have used on the next slide. Now, with varying degrees of understanding, because I never, you know, by heaven's sake, I never got to install, I was never able to compile slabware right. So it was not fun. And that took a long time back in the day. You know, one of the reasons why I started with Linux was because I did not like Windows interfaces. And it just bothered me. It was not pretty enough. And so I had heard that on Linux you had KDE, for example, back in the day. And that KDE was able to change themes very quickly, very nicely. You didn't have to do any kind of hacking for it. And so that got me started into Linux. I remember subscribing to a magazine because back in the day I didn't have internet at my house, and I don't think they offered Linux to be downloaded. They just gave you CDs. And so I started doing that. I got CDs for Best Linux. And I could not find the logo because it's so gone. That thing lasted for maybe a year, and the project died. So that was my first Linux distribution that I tried, and I never got the graphical environment to launch. So it was a mess, and I think I broke a couple of computers back then trying to do this. And so it was a lot. It was a ride, but it was a lot of fun. And so because of that, I started looking into a lot of Linux distributions that could supply the understanding that I had, the need that I had for better graphics, interestingly enough. That was my first interest. And I remember there are a few cool ones here that you may not have ever heard of, but Fox Linux was one that could mimic the Mac dock at the bottom. Was one of the first ones, and it was from Italy. And I jumped right on that. Then I tried, well, Mandriva has been through a few changes, so it used to be Mandrake, and then the project started dying down, so they thought, let's change our name to Mandriva. And then the project started dying down, and this time it did die, and they split in 2 places, one called Ulteo, this one right here. This one was more kind of running Linux on a web browser, and then they changed into Mandriva. So, Magia, sorry. That's where it's at now. So I tried all this. I remember this is how I met a good friend of mine in college. He had Sabayan, and I had, I think it was Ubuntu at the time, or OpenSUSE. And we talked about how we both had Linux and no one else did. And I remember using Haiku. Haiku is still available, but Haiku is the Linux version of BOS, if you ever used BOS. BOS is not open, well, was not open source, but it was created by a guy that left Apple. And so I was so excited to see it because I was like, oh, an Apple guy is going to create Linux, so it must be really pretty. And it turned out to be super useful. I still miss a lot of the features that they have. And Haiku is kind of the surviving element of that. I don't know if they can actually run the programs that BOS could run, but it's still pretty good.
Binary compatible.
I think they are they not?
I'm pretty sure it's binary compatible with BOS.
So last time I tried, the programs didn't launch. So I tried to run something from BOS into Haiku, and it didn't work out. Then I tried Symfony OS, and the cool thing about their logo is that it imitates their desktop, because their desktop had active corners that you could just move your mouse into, and just, like what GNOME does today. You go into a corner, and the interface changes and it shows programs and things like that. So it was very cool. Some of you may have seen Deepin. This one actually mimics a little bit what Windows 8 does now, where there's a sliding black panel to the side with all your menus. It's really cool. But that's just some of that. And I think a lot of these that I have used have been because I broke something and I wanted to try something different to see if it got unbroken. Right now, though, I really like Elementary. I don't know if you guys have used Elementary before. Elementary, for looks, it's pretty cool. And anyway, so this was the main drive that I had. And that, because I had complaints also about some of the graphics on Linux, I decided to go on the IRC channels for OpenSUSE particularly. OpenSUSE had just become OpenSUSE, and I started going there and just complaining about stuff. And obviously enough, people didn't take it nice that this new person suddenly shows up and tells us we're doing things wrong. But I didn't know any better, and I didn't know how the community behaved. I didn't know that if it was people that were paid to be there or not. But little by little, I started learning about it, and I really got hooked on being part of the community at OpenSUSE. And so much so that I started creating graphics for them. And that's one of the things that OpenSUSE knows me most about for, which is my graphics. So let me show you some of the things that I have done, if I may. So let's just click escape.
No. I might escape.
Oh, there you go. Let's just do. So if I Google myself, something that I was never able to do before, I created myself this name right here, this internet name, Andito San. And yeah, and so when you Google my name, you find some of the things that I created for OpenSUSE. So some logos, well, some pictures I took. I created that for them. And that was my starter with OpenSUSE, at least, the OpenSUSE community. I created that and I showed it to some of them, and they were like, wow, you should be in our artwork team. And so, yeah, we started creating that stuff. Some people took my work and created some differences. I made that for a German magazine that wanted to feature OpenSUSE as a project. So I went ahead and created that. Because OpenSUSE's Geeko is the mascot. I created that. Well, not all my artwork is good, I can tell you that. But I created that for 12.3. Some mock-ups of ideas that I had about desktop and what things could change. That's my own chameleon that I photographed over there. And some friends just try to do what I did and try to create their own artwork. OpenSUSE is really keen to beer, by the way. They love beer, and they have a place in Germany that makes beer just for them, just for the group. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But so that's some of the things that you see that I've done. Oh, I wanted to have that one as a logo for OpenSUSE, our last conference, but I don't know, they didn't take it. These are some ideas that I have about KDE, and I don't know if you know this, but KDE is changing and evolving. It's releasing a new version here soon, the Plasma desktop, and so I've tried to influence the team a little bit about some of the things that they're doing with the graphics and the way they organize the information. This one was for a book cover for KDE, for Frameworks 5. They didn't take it, but whatever. I don't hold grudges. These are some icons that I try to create, some mock-ups. Yeah, some of the other. That was for our OpenSUSE conference in Greece. That was for our cube. Just a lot of fun. So that's where I've been, and let me see, where is the prison right here? Cool. and then let's do this. And so, yeah, that's, one of the ways that you can involve yourself with Linux. Since I am not a very, advanced in technology, I guess, in the way that you are, I decided to help with what I knew, which was, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of graphics, and I've done about 3 or 4 conferences and meetups for OpenSUSE that I've created artwork for, and I've recently kind of, that has been dying down because they're not as energetic as they used to be. So I've been moving more toward KDE. That's actually getting things going a lot. So let me tell you some of the things that I consider are very important about Linux. One of them is security. Linux is very secure. And some people say, well, secure as in, can you hack it or can you not? But in most cases, when you talk about security, you think of how fast can you react to a problem. If you're vulnerable, can you find out how vulnerable you are? Or you cannot. So in closed processes, probably you cannot do that. You can't catch things as fast. You don't have enough manpower to patch something. So it takes a while. So Linux generally is very, very secure in the sense that you can find ways to make it more secure if you find out very quickly that there is a problem with it. For example, do you remember the Heartbleed bug that was going around last year, was it? I want to say last year. That one, a lot of big places got hacked, or they found out about the problem. And since it kind of touched on Linux quite a bit, within 1 day, that thing was patched. And then they released a new version of whatever software was vulnerable, and it was done. By the time, so I used to work as a technician at Bluehost by that time, and so I found out on the news that there was this Heartbleed bug going around. And then I got to work, and all we were supposed to say to our customers is, we've already fixed it. So it was really quick. So that's one great thing about Linux. The quality is really good too. For example, if you think of Debian really stresses quality, stability, and they don't release, even if it's older software, they don't release anything unless they are sure it's the best quality. Now, in most cases, though, you may think of Linux as something being in beta all the time because it's always being developed. But like in any development process, you stop that. You freeze it, and then you start working on bugs and making the version very stable, and then you release it. It's very customizable. That was one of the reasons why I went to Linux. You could just change anything. Some of you have said that. You could just, have you guys ever dealt with compiling the kernel? Changing something in the kernel and then you compile it? Like, would you ever be able to do that with OS X or with Windows? Never, probably never. So that's one great thing about Linux. You can just, and you can just find something that you need to change that is particular to your case or to your computer. You can just, if you have enough knowledge to code to change a few things on the kernel, you can just go ahead and do it. There's a lot of freedom in Linux. A lot of things that are unrestrained. You're not constrained. See, whatever you want to do with it, you can do it. And nobody's going to stop you. Now, with a lot of freedom comes a lot of responsibility, so be careful. Don't do anything crazy, but definitely you can do anything you want to code into it. It's really fun. It's got a lot of support. So support options, as I mentioned before, you can go on chats on IRC. I think they're phasing out now though, but they use a lot of mailing lists. You can contact people directly. It's super easy to just tell somebody, hey, you happen to work on Linux. Can you tell me about this issue? Do you think I can? There are a lot of forums out there. but they're very DIY, so watch out. You just gotta be careful. But if you have a complaint and you say there's something here that is not working, you can submit a bug to the organization that is running that, and they'll take care of it for the next release. It's that easy. And in most companies, you can do that, but who knows if they're going to have the time or resources to take care of that. In many cases in Linux, you can actually contact the maintainer directly and say, hey, I need you to take a look into this because it's not working right. And another thing is the cost. For companies at least, when you say 0, they're all over that. When you say the cost is free, you don't have to worry about any much else. Right now, for example, in my company, we're trying to work on becoming paperless. Because believe it or not, although we're a company that does technology, we use a lot of paper. I'm using paper right now, I shouldn't be. So, and so that's one thing that I told them. Hey, we are a hosting company here at Bluehost. Why don't we use our own servers with Linux, and we store our files there, our digitized files. And on top of that, I want to use a free software, open source software, that will manage the files. Like, WordPress that creates a website, right? But this one is just for documents. And it was super easy to find a solution like that. It was better than anything else because the cost was 0, the implementation cost 0, and the maintenance probably costs 0 too. Because, that's a triple win. Because our people in our own company know how to do this. We just assign time for them to do it, and they will do it. We don't have to hire anybody external. They know the programming language that we're using, and we're all good. And so I think my boss is pretty happy. He thinks it's a good idea. Now, last thing for you guys. I wanted to give you an idea of who uses Linux out there. Big companies. And then I'll give you an idea of who uses Linux here in Utah. Big companies that use Linux, Oracle, Microsoft actually. They use Linux too.
They used it fairly recently, but yeah, they use Linux to host their servers.
Yep. So there's got to be a superiority there that's happening. Apple actually is, in general, but OS X is just a derivative of BSD. So at the core, at least, they're Unix. Then there's also, of course, Bluehost. GoDaddy uses that. Novell, Google, Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, IBM, even McDonald's uses Linux. There are certain businesses in Utah that benefit from Linux. They are not Linux-oriented businesses, but their products and their back-end runs on Linux. For example, and this may be something that you may want to consider for the future as you go into careers, Bluehost itself uses Linux. There's also C7, so just about any data center business out here uses Linux. Mojo Marketplace, Adobe, CSS Corp, Cybercoders, Hughes Network, FiberNet in Orem, and there's Domo. There's Domo, and I think that was there we go. There's EMC, Proofpoint, Dealer Socket, HireView, Overstock, and Skullcandy. Actually, the CEO of Skullcandy visited Bluehost not long ago, and he gave us some headphones. It was a lot of fun. And another last thing, I actually talked to one of the guys at the data center in our company, and I said, well, tell me what you think people should learn in college so that they can be better prepared, at least in the data center environments. I know that not all of you are in that, but he gave me an answer, at least for the part that deals with data centers, managing servers, managing technologies in that end. And so good things to write down are databases, for example, MySQL, Postgres, SQL itself, and those are the main, I think those are the main ones. There are others, but also knowing about DHCP, RC servers, Blades, VPS, hosting, just about any hosting uh, word that you can come up with is related to this. And I said, well, what Linux technologies are being used in our data center right now? KVM, which is pretty good for doing a lot of virtualization. LVM, software RAID, C groups, Drucot, I don't even know how to pronounce that. Shrouded environment, so for example, anything that you can change permissions for is pretty good. There's a lot of, knowing Bash, knowing V, anything that deals with the command line, you better learn it because it's really good and it helps a lot. Now, let me tell you something very interesting as my last thing. I never thought that when I left college that I would be working for a technology company. I liked Linux a lot, and Linux has always been my hobby. Has been something that I've done on the side. And sure enough, I did not find a job as a historian. I didn't find a job in any college or anything like that. And so I started doing things from the ground up. I thought, why don't I just am a tech? I actually think I have the chops for that. So I started being a tech, paid very little. And at least at Bluehost, they recognized the potential. And I'm now a recruiter doing technology recruitment. So I recruit people who do Linux work. And that's, interestingly enough, I just said, I'm a Linux guy, so, okay, welcome into Bluehost. I said, I'm a Linux guy, and I worked for FiberNet. I'm a Linux guy, and I got into community, so it was so good. So I think that even if you feel that maybe Linux will not be the thing that you will be doing for the rest of your life, I think that having it on a resume helps a lot. It goes a long way. You will see faces change when you say, well, I built servers before using the LAMP stack. People are going to be like, well, welcome in. So it's really good. So I can tell you it opens doors. It's probably the model of technology of the future. We're not so much anymore into closed source environments. At least if you talk about the internet is all about Linux. And so take it into consideration, it'll help you. And thank you so much for having me. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer questions too. But thank you guys. Oh, so is there time for questions, or do you guys not consider questions?
No questions.
No questions?
Questions.
Are you all good? Happy? Nothing? Yeah?
Can we follow you on social media?
For sure. It just makes my comma points go up.
So what distro do you use right now?
Right now, I'm just running things virtually because I have a Mac. And so I know I work on my computer and I say, well, the hardware is nice, but where is the software? And I do it mostly because of the graphic work. Sometimes I have to, do things mostly on the Adobe suite, and so things that Inkscape cannot do, things that GIMP cannot do, and so I have to kind of use other software. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now, and I haven't changed from OpenSUSE in a long time. Just because there was a time in the 90s where a lot of Linux distributions popped up. And since I was getting them in the mail, in a magazine, I used to just try the new one every time. That's how I got that number of distros. But then it kind of stopped. It has plateaued a little bit. Yeah, there's not as many new distributions out there. Maybe Raspbian because of the attached hardware idea that they have, but others have been here for a while. I haven't seen any new ones lately. Not that many. If you go to distrowatch.com, you will see that the top 10 are probably the same that they were 4 years ago. Any other questions? No, you're not dying to ask me a question about the shell or maybe about how to run a bash command? I don't know, so don't ask. What's
I was
that?
gonna ask you a favorite cash trick.
Well, one thing that I thought it was a cool bash trick that I never thought of, like we call it, because we use Windows, and in Windows you can create shortcuts, right? And on Linux you can create a soft link, so you can just kind of like a symlink, sorry, and so you can link a binary to like a link and put it somewhere else and just call it out of the shell. And so one day I was like, what is a symlink? I don't get it. Like, what's the big deal with this? And someone said, oh, it's just like a shortcut on Windows. I was like, years and years of trying to figure this out. Yeah. Any last questions? Yeah.
What do you use to graphic design?
So, because everybody in the open source community was a little diehard about it, I had to use Linux software. So I feel really confident that I can just whip out anything on Inkscape. Inkscape is really good, very versatile, very quickly. You can get something done. So it's my bedrock. And then there's GIMP, but to a certain degree. Sometimes Photoshop is just stronger at processing things, but GIMP can do just as much without complicating yourself too much. Sometimes there are things that you think as a graphic designer that you want to do, and GIMP just doesn't go along with that, whereas Photoshop has it built in, for example. And so I have to make that choice there, but GIMP is a good one. I used a lot of, I used Krita, but not a lot because I didn't do a lot of illustration. And what's the one that does a page layout?
Acrobat?
No, I want to say Syllable, but I think that's wrong. But there is one that helps you create books and flyers. It's a little like in Adobe InDesign, and I've used that one a lot to create some of these things. And they're really cool. But the main one always has been vector graphics, and yeah, so that's what I've used. Cool? Are we cool? Yeah? Yeah?
Where can we, sorry, my question about following you on social media was vague. Where can we see more of your art?
You can, well, I have it distributed in a few places, but you can go, if you Google my nickname, then you'll find it.
Remind me your nickname again.
Anditossan. Anditossan. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, so if you just Google that, I think you'll find it. I have things on Flickr, I have things on PhotoBucket, and I have things on just on our Linux wikis. I mean, on our OpenSUSE wikis, and in some of the blogs that people have posted. So yeah, cool.
Oh, and that leads me to one other question. I'm sorry. How would one go about getting involved in the open source community?
Yeah, it's super simple. You just gotta have an interest in something that's related to an open source community, and very likely they'll have a mailing list that you can subscribe to, so that you can get news and questions about what's going on with their community, and you can involve yourself there. You can also take a look into forums. Generally, a community will have forums. You can definitely get into Git. If you go to GitHub, you will find a lot of open source projects, and you can, if you're technically savvy enough, you can introduce code, you can fork, and then push that up to the main branch, and see if they actually take it. And that's a good way to get into the community. Another thing is show up at meetups like these. You can show up at conferences, you can show up at many other things, and so it's another good way. You can meet people that are very interested, well, they have spent years in it, you know, so it's pretty cool. But other than that, don't do like I did. Don't criticize everybody for what they're doing, because in Linux, I don't know if you know this, but they have a saying that says the ones that do, lead. So if you do something, you're the owner of that, and there's a lot of feelings attached to that. So if you go tell somebody, hey, the work you did is awful, you know, they're probably not going to take it very nice. And there's a lot of meritocracy happening in Linux, so the more you do, the more of a leadership idea you have. I didn't know, but at some point while I was doing graphic work, I was like the leader of the artwork team. People came to me first to ask me for artwork rather than the other team members. So it happens as you create new things for the community. And putting your name out there, like in all of my resumes, I always put, I've done this for Linux, I've done this for OpenSUSE, I've done this for that, because it helps a lot. So very cool. Awesome, well thank you guys.